Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. On to the next video. So this video is about the business letter of intent to purchase. Essentially, you have now got the listing, you've now listed it, you've successfully fielded all the calls, and now you've got a potential buyer that says, you know what, I'm ready to make an offer and do an intent to purchase. Now, before I go over this exact document, I want to again refresh you. There's different verbiage people use, and they mean a lot of different things. So, for example, some people will say, I want to submit an LOI. That is a letter of intent to purchase. Essentially, what that means is it's like, hey, I'm going to purchase this, but it's not official yet. An intent to purchase is always a little gray. At the end of the day, though, we really kind of wanted to combine a purchase agreement and a letter of intent to purchase, so where it really fits the need and it's a little bit more generic to where it can be up to you as the potential broker of the deal to say, hey, look, we could do a potential or we could do actually a right to the purchase agreement, okay? So you are going to use this and send this to a potential buyer, and then again negotiate it with the seller on the terms that they are agreed upon. So you will probably need to walk through this with every buyer. So again, I'll walk through it as if you are the potential buyer, and I'll talk you through it. Okay. So again, on the first part, this is really just the generic. Put your name, information. Obviously, you'll have the seller's information already in there. Please take in mind, it's not going to be more than likely the sell of just one person. It's going to be an LLC of some sort of standard portfolio, if you will. It's never really the business owner's name. For example, if it's Wendy's, you're not going to put Wendy's Barbecue. You're going to put the LLC who owns that franchise of the Wendy's. I think I just said Wendy's Barbecue. I wish they said barbecue. On the buyer, it's the same thing. Make sure you put the buyer's LLC information. If they don't have an LLC, not a good sign, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't know very many people that will buy it based off of no LLC, especially if it has to do with a lease, landlord, a real estate purchase. The landlords are going to want an LLC for sure. Okay. Now, bullet point number 2 is the sale price. Again, cash portion, loan amount, sales price. You could be very, generic here. You could say, hey, buyer, if you want to buy this via third-party financing, let's put down the deposit. Cash is $80,000 and the purchase price is $500,000. So you will then loan amount $420 for a total sales price of $500,000. Okay, very simple things that any negotiation term you've done. The financing terms, again, assumption of promissory note. Essentially, a buyer agrees to pay the unpaid balance. That's where you're going to assume the loan. So say there's a restaurant out there that's got fixed assets. It's got a lease on maybe even a building, or maybe it's got, let's see, dishwashing equipment in the back. That's fixed asset. All that could be a loan, and you're going to assume that loan of that note. Most of the time, you're probably used to seeing it in real estate where you assume the loan of the house. Well, there are loans that are taken without in a business, that maybe a vehicle, or if it's a moving company, that you will just assume those loans. Same with leasing as well. You'll assume the lease. And a lot, like I said, dishwashing, you've got smokers, you've got trucks that are leased for moving companies. All that stuff you can assume, and that could be in there. It's probably only 10% of the time. 90% of it's going to be you're buying it as an asset and taking over that loan. Now, third-party financing, you'll need an approved letter. If you have, an SBA letter that says you need to be approved, this is where you'll attach it and you'll check that box. Now, where most deals play is in seller financing. So make sure that you have all of the ducks in a row when it comes to seller financing. This is where you will really go over with the potential seller before you send this off to a buyer that says, what terms will you agree to before you even send it to the potential buyer. This is the installment notes. Now, you can come up with your own interest rates, your own terms. This is seller financing, so it's all on their own will, if you will. Now, purchase deposit. This is where a lot of brokers will get tripped up a little bit, because where does the earnest money go? What's the address? Well, it depends on every state. And there's a lot of business transaction legal team out there, and we can help you find them. But essentially, that's where it's going to go to. It's going to go to the lawyers that are going to help transact this business. They'll take an escrow payment essentially of, it could be 5,000, 10,000, it could be 5%. It's completely up to you as a broker and the seller and the buyer. I can tell you with my own experience, it's usually about $5,000 to $10,000 to show that you're serious and you're ready to go. Now, what happens, and I know all of you are thinking this, if we don't close or go through due diligence and there's some issue, do you get your money back? The answer is yes, based off of your amendments that you have in the contract that we'll have here below. But most of the time, there's just a fee that the legal team will charge you, say $200 to $500, to where you will get charged that as a potential purchaser, saying that, hey, you didn't go through with this business for whatever reason, that's fine. Here's your $5,000 back, but there's a fee of $250. Okay. So you'll make sure that you will talk about this in the purchase deposit amount as well. Now, due diligence period is, again, for a business under $1 million, we'll call it, again, rough math, say 2 weeks of diligence. This is where you go through, you see everything underneath the hood of the business. You can ask for anything. So you will write within X amount of days this contract. You will put that in there, how long you have. Within 3 days of an effective date, buyer must deliver due diligence fee of X to the escrow agent. That's completely up to the transaction, meaning sometimes there's fees where $1,000 to do a due diligence report because it takes time and money to pull due diligence. Most of the time, though, they're negotiated without a due diligence fee. It's just a due diligence period. Okay. Failure to deliver timely. This is extremely important because you will find that when people will ask for, I want to see the last 3 years' taxes, bank accounts, XYZ, it can get very complicated. And you need to put yourself in the shoes of both the buyer and the seller. The buyer wants everything under the moon and back to be able to make sure that their purchase is there. The seller and those that have ran businesses know that sometimes paperwork isn't always there, and what you're asking for is not feasible. So this is where it's all about setting expectations. Say, hey, look, we really want a respectable, timely manner. If someone asks for something, we want 48 hours. And it'll talk about, here's some remedies here in a second. But also failure to deliver these things gives me the right to back out of this contract. And buyer will not have to terminate the contract under this paragraph. Bottom line, if you set a normal time frame, if you will, of 24 to 48 hours, nobody's getting back to you. You've got paper trail that says you've asked for this, no one's getting back. You can absolutely get out of that due diligence contract. Now, what's included in this asset? You put all that information in there. You'll see most of the time that if you own a moving company, you might have 3 or 4 different domain names. All that needs to be listed in here, what's being sold. Everything that's in there, leasehold improvements, lease rights, contract rights, on-hand inventory. If it's a liquor store, for example, that is your most important asset, right? So you need to go through and do a check at the time of the due diligence and a check at the day before you close, so that way all inventory that's included is accurate. Continuing cash on hand. Most of the time, when there's a transaction, cash is usually not included. Now, if it's a $4, $5, $10 million business, having $1 million in the bank account is considered a discount when you buy it because you get that money in the bank. So all that needs to be accounted for. Everything's in there. Lease deposits. Please make sure that's listed, and you go through and ask that ahead of time with the buyer, so that way, the seller, so the buyer knows. Again, inventory, trade receivables, work in progress. This is all stuff that's not that you can go through and just put yourself in here and list it. It could be anything from uniforms to it's a flower shop, amount of vases that they have in the back room, and make sure that is all listed in there. And essentially, a buyer and seller shall determine inventory value jointly before the closing date. It's usually the day before is the final count, and usually right when the due diligence happens when you do your first count. Okay. Legal fees. Point number 9 is a really simple. It sounds aggressive and it sounds like it could be tricky, but it's really not. I would say 95% of the time it's split between the buyer and seller 50-50. Now, there are some times, just like you would include in buying a house, that you could say, hey, I want my closing costs included in the loan. You could do that as well here in the business world. So essentially, it could be paid for 100% by the buyer, but it's included in the loans. Okay. Otherwise, you got to bring that cash to the table. Now, there is the opportunity, to do different types of valuations. It depends on what you decide to do as a broker with the seller, but most of the time there is a seller valuation fee. And why do you have a valuation? It's really obvious because you want to have backing to what the business is worth, and you can have a leg to stand on when there's sellers that are coming at you, or buyers coming at you with low prices. So that valuation cost, and it's worth every single penny. Most of the time, again, it's also split 50-50. But man, as a person that's selling a business, having a valuation behind you is extremely important to have, and they range differently depending on the price of the business. Now, this is the lease section, probably the section that will hold up the most amount of transactions, because the lease won't be transferable for some reason. So you really want to get the details when you're about to list a business. If it has a lease, you have already contacted the landlord. They know that they're selling the business. There's a landlord approval letter that says that they can transfer this business. They will want basically funds and proof from the potential buyer, but this lease part is extremely important. Make sure everybody is upfront and has it. And then finally, the non-compete agreement. This is an obvious one. If you're buying a flower shop from somebody, you don't want them to open up one down the street. Most of the time, to give you kind of a ballpark, it's usually 1 year. And sometimes if it's a little bit more, like a plumbing company that's been in business for 20 years, they'll maybe ask for a 3 to 5 year type of thing. Training, again, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you put that in there. How long is that person willing to stay? I've seen no time. I've seen a year. Closing date, very easy. Possession date. So why is closing date and possession date a little different? Well, because sometimes they do it on pay period dates. Sometimes they'll do it on when the landlord wants it. They could be a little bit different. Obviously, there's going to be prorations. It just lets you know that. Assume liabilities, a very important one. I could tell you, just even myself, purchasing restaurants, there are software technology fees that essentially are tied to the address, gas for soda machines. You're assuming those liabilities, so make sure that everybody has every vendor or merchant or company that's partnered with that current company to be listed, so they know what assumed liabilities are on there. Seller warrants that at closing, the business assets being sold be transferred. This all goes into the legality of it. They will see if there's any liens or notes or things like that on these assets, so they can go through and find out exactly before any close. The lawyers will help out big time with this. There's obviously a casualty loss claim in here. Basically, if something were to happen, that's, a tornado happens. If there's any other prior conditions that weren't essentially reasonably possible, or the contract shall terminate and the purchase deposit money will be refunded to the buyer without any broker's fee due. So not really ever seen this happen too much, but you never know. Default, buyer's default, fulfill their obligations. Seller's default, fulfill their obligations, meaning they didn't write the escrow check. They're not getting back to me on the taxes. All of that can essentially allow the contract to be voided and the buyer and seller to depart ways. Completion blocked by buyer's default, attorney's fees and court costs. So again, these are all very self-explanatory as you read through them. Attorney's fees and costs vary. I can tell you that it's per transaction. I would say most businesses under $1 million are roughly $5 to $7 grand in closing costs. As if they're over that, it could be a lot more. Escrow agent, again, that's all with the legality team. They're going to help you out, and they're going to have an agent that works for them that helps you track things down. Essentially, them and yourself will not have any liability in this transaction. The agents that help transact it, that's all you are, is a consultant to help transact. Depending on the state, different verbiage. But essentially, that's what an escrow agent is. Standstill agreement: during the time this contract, seller shall not, without prior consent from buyer, engage in negotiations with any other party regarding the seller's business. So once you're due diligence, it's a standstill agreement. The broker's fee, as you talked about, is negotiated before you even sell it. We list it here. The buyer does not have to know that fee at all. That's up to you and the seller to disclose that at all. They'll try to negotiate that. Some potential buyers will, that says, well, hey, you're getting paid too much out of this deal, take this off. Not okay and not disclosable. So that's between you and the seller. Partial execution offer period, again, self-explanatory. Benefit and survival. This, again, most of the time when you're working with LLCs, they have trust and wills that talk about, if you were to buy their business or sell your business, where it goes. Choice of law. Again, depending on the state that you're in, this form will be specific to you, where the contract will be honored, if you will. Again, notices. Real estate notice is a big one, right? That we are a consulting firm specializing in businesses, not real estate. However, some of you might be real estate agents. So that will be a different purchase agreement that goes through the legality of purchasing real estate. This is just for businesses, okay? Agreement of parties, proof of funds, again, all the stuff that you should be doing and the broker should be doing in the due diligence before they even bring an offer to the table. That's just a checklist for you to have. And then finally, the autographs. Everybody's going to sign their John Hancocks, and we get that excluded receipt contract. Broker information. It depends on, right? You may be powered by a certain firm. You put that information that your own LLC, if you have your own firm, things like that. But that essentially will conclude this form. It's a big one. Again, it seems like it's a lot, but as you go through some transactions, you will find that it's not that big of a deal. And again, the legal teams and the escrow agents will help you get through it all. All right, we'll talk to you guys soon.